We are starting in a few minutes, Dad. We are starting. Okay, bye.
Jesus' name. Give glory, glory, glory to his name forever. Praise the Lord. Father, we thank you for another evening, Father God. We just bless your holy name, Father God. We just bless your holy name again, Father. Thank you for bringing us, Lord, again into your presence, oh Lord. Lord, we pray, Father God, that, Lord, you will grant us, oh Lord God, grace, Father God, to find you, Lord God, this evening, oh Lord. Lord, we just don't want to come, Father God. And Lord, I pray, Father God, that this will not be boring, oh Father God, because, Lord, you are not a boring God, oh Father God. Your word says that at your right hand are pleasures forevermore, Father God. And Father God, we will not be bored, Father God. The Lord, just like the angels, oh Father God, every time they see you, Lord God, they have something to see always, and they always cry, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. I pray, Father God, that every time, Lord God, we come and listen to your word, Father God, we pray, Father God, that, Lord, we will not say, what is this, Lord God? Lord, you will fill us, oh Father God, with goodness, oh Lord God. Because, oh Lord, it's your goodness that leads us always to repentance, oh Lord God. I pray, Father God, that, Lord, every time we come to this table, Father God, to listen to your word, Father God, that, Lord, it will be a time of refreshing, oh Lord God. The Lord, we will be refreshed, oh Father God. And Lord, we will glorify you, Father God. So, Lord, we pray, Father God, let there be a light in every home, Father God, oh Lord. And Lord, help us to just enjoy you, Father God. Lord, we want to enjoy you, Father God. Oh Lord, please, oh Lord, that, Lord, we will not be casual. Lord, we will not be irreverent, oh Father God. But Lord, we will come with holy fear every time we come, oh Lord God. Because, Lord, we believe and we know that, Lord, you will speak to us, oh Lord God. So this evening, we just want to thank you that you are willing, oh Lord, to speak to us, oh Lord God. Thank you, Father God. Plead the blood of Jesus over every ears, oh Lord, that are hearing, Father God, this evening. Pray, Father God, that, Lord, you will circumcise our ears, oh Father God. And, Lord, we will hear clearly again, oh Lord God. Thank you, Father God. Thank you, thank you. Thank you. We bless your holy name, oh Lord. We bless you. We bless you. We bless you. Thank you, Father. Bless the name of Jesus, praise the name of Jesus, sing to the King of Israel. I will bless the name of Jesus, praise the name of Jesus, sing to the King of Israel. I will bless the name of Jesus, praise the name of Jesus, sing to the King of Israel. I will bless the name of Jesus, praise the name of Jesus, sing to the King of Israel. I give glory, glory, glory to his name forever. I give glory, glory to his name. I give glory, oh glory, glory to his name forever. I give glory, glory to his His name. I will the name of Jesus. Praise the name of Jesus. Sing to the King of Israel. Oh, I give glory, glory, glory to His name. Forever I give glory, I give glory, glory to His name. I give glory, I give glory, glory, glory to His name. Forever I give glory, glory, glory to His name. Hosanna, Hosanna, Hosanna in the highest. Hosanna, Hosanna, Hosanna in the highest. Lord, we lift up your name with a heart full of praise. Be exalted, O Lord our God. Hosanna in the highest. Hosanna, 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 Hosanna in the highest. Hallelujah, Hosanna, Hosanna, Hosanna in the highest. Oh Lord, Lord, we lift up your name, we lift up your name with a heart full of praise. Be exalted, O Lord our God. Hosanna in the highest. Oh, glory, glory, glory to the King of Kings. Hallelujah, glory, glory, glory to the King of Kings. Lord, we lift up your name with a heart full of praise. Be exalted, O Lord our God. Oh, glory to the King of Kings. Sing Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. Jesus is the King of Kings. Hallelujah. Oh, Jesus, Jesus. Jesus is the King of Kings. Lord, we lift up your name with a heart full of praise. Be exalted, O Lord our God. Oh, Jesus is the King of Kings. Lord, we lift up your name with a heart full of praise. Be exalted, O Lord our God. Hosanna in the highest. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Hosanna, Hosanna, Lord. Just thank you, Father God. We praise you. We will worship the Lamb of glory. We will worship the King of Kings. We will worship the Lamb of glory. We will worship the King. We will worship the Lamb of glory. We will worship the King of Kings. We will worship the Lamb of glory. We will worship the King. And with our hands lifted high, we will worship and sing with our hands lifted high. We come before you rejoicing with our hands lifted high to the sky as the world wonders why. We'll just tell them we're loving our King, and with our hands lifted high, we will worship and sing. With our hands lifted high, we come before you rejoicing. With our hands lifted high to the sky as the world wonders why. We'll just tell them we're loving our King. We will worship the Lamb of glory. We will worship the King of kings. We will worship the Lamb of glory. We will worship the King, and with our hands lifted high, we will worship and sing. With our hands lifted high, we come before you rejoicing. With our hands lifted high to the sky as the world wonders why. We'll just tell them we're loving our King, and with our hands lifted high, we will worship and sing. With our hands lifted high, we come before you rejoicing. With our hands lifted high to the sky as the world wonders why. We'll just tell them we're loving our King. We'll just tell them we're loving our King. We'll just tell them we're loving our King. So give thanks with a grateful heart. Give thanks to the Holy One. We give you thanks because He's given Jesus Christ, His Son. Oh, we give you thanks with a grateful heart. We give you thanks to the Holy One. We give you thanks. Oh, because He's given Jesus Christ, His Son. Oh, and now let the weak say, I am strong. Let the poor say, I am rich, because of what the Lord has done for. Oh, and now, let the weak say, I am strong. Let the poor say, I am rich, because of what the Lord has done for us. Oh, give thanks. Even as you sing this song, just ask for an attitude of gratitude this evening. Even as you worship, just ask the Lord to fill you this evening. Just give thanks. Just give Him thanks this evening. Even as we sing this song again. So give thanks. Come give thanks with a grateful heart. We give you thanks. To the Holy One, we give you thanks, because He's given Jesus Christ, oh, His Son. Oh, we give you thanks. With a grateful heart, we give you thanks. To the Holy One, we give you thanks, because He's given Jesus Christ, oh, His Son. And now let the weak say, I am strong. Let the poor say, I am rich, because of what the Lord has done for us. Oh, and now, let the weak say, I am strong. Let the poor say, I am rich, because of what the Lord has done for us. Oh, we give you thanks. Oh, just give Him thanks. Give Him thanks. Oh, we give you thanks, Lord. Oh, we give you thanks. Oh, we give you thanks, Lord. Oh, we give you thanks. Oh, we give you thanks. Oh, we give you thanks. Oh, Lord. What a friend we have in Jesus. All our sins and griefs to bear. Oh, what a privilege to carry everything to God in prayer. Oh, what peace we often forfeit. Oh, what needless pain we bear. All because we do not carry everything to God in prayer. Have we trials and temptation? Is there trouble anywhere? We should never be discouraged. Take it to the Lord in prayer. Oh, can we find a friend so faithful, who will all our sorrows share? Jesus knows our every weakness. Take it to the Lord in prayer. Are we weak and heavy laden? Cumbered with a load of care. Precious Savior, still our refuge. Take it to the Lord in prayer. Do thy friends despise, forsake thee? Take it to the Lord in prayer. In His arms He'll take and shield thee. will find a solace there. Blessed Savior, thou hast promised, thou with all our burdens bear. May we ever, Lord, be bringing all to Thee in earnest prayer. Soon in glory bright and clouded, there will be no need for prayer. Rapture, praise, and endless worship will be our sweet portion there. Thank you, Lord Jesus. I want us to sing the second verse again. It says, have we trials and temptations? Is there trouble anywhere? Oh, we should never be discouraged. Take it to the Lord in prayer. Can we find a friend so faithful, who will all our sorrows share? Jesus knows our every weakness. Take it to the Lord in prayer. I just guess that everything that we're all going through, everything has just been encapsulated in the words of this song. Trials, temptations, troubles, fears, whatever we're going through, the Word of God says we should never be discouraged. We have not been given the spirit of fear. God has not given us the spirit of fear, of love and a sound mind. So this evening, whatever you may be going through, whatever is your trouble, whatever is your temptation, maybe you're tempted to fear, maybe you're tempted to be discouraged, maybe you're tempted to be depressed. Just look to Christ this evening. Look to the cross. Look to the cross. Look to the cross. Look to the cross. Oh, Father, we look to you this evening, because you're a friend that we can trust. You can take it to the Lord in prayer. Thank you, Father God, that you've made a provision for us. You've made that provision, Lord, and we thank you, Father God, this evening. Lord, I pray that as we all listen for your voice this evening, as we all listen to the word, Father God, I pray, Father God, that you will meet us at the point of our need, Father God. Speak to everyone, oh Lord God. Let everyone go back encouraged, Father God. Let everyone go back with their heads, oh Lord, held high, Lord God, in the name of Jesus. In the name of Jesus. Oh Father God, that Lord, every spirit of discouragement would be dispelled, oh Lord, in the name of Jesus. And Lord, your people will have that assurance, oh Father God, again, oh Lord God, that they are sons and daughters, oh Father God. Hallelujah, hallelujah, Lord. We bless you, Lord. Commit the rest of this time into your hands. Be glorified, oh Lord. Be glorified, be glorified. We thank you, Lord. We praise you, Lord. In Jesus' mighty name we worship. Amen.
Amen.
I am alive and I am live. Okay, now I'm switching my language back to English, more comfortable. And I think a couple of you learned some Nepali today. I think some of you were watching. So we are back to the word. We just thank God. And I forgot the day who listened to the morning sermon of feeling like Phineas. You got your javelin in your hand. Okay. Let's look to the Lord. Father, we just thank you, Lord. We just thank you. We just thank you. We just thank you, Lord. The mystery of the kingdom. The mystery, the love of Christ for his church. The mystery of holiness. So much about you is mystery, Lord. All of eternity, we will be discovering that incredible mystery of Christ, of God in Christ. Even this night, Lord, as we look into your word, I pray your word will look into us. When we look into us, we hardly see anything. We feel everything is fine. But when your word looks into us, your living word looks into us, we see the hand of God showing things in us which we never saw before. The mercy of God forgiving, the grace of God equipping. We know we are loved. I pray everybody who hearing in their homes, they feel loved by God. Never doubt the love of God. For the cross stands there as an eternal symbol of how much God loves us. So this evening, Father, I pray, when as we look into thy word, you would speak once again, you would teach us once again, you prepare us once again, you would open our eyes once again, Lord. Open eyes, Lord. Speak, Father. For in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. First I want to turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 32. पहली कुरिन्थियर की चिट्ठी 10वें अध्याय और 32वां वाक्य. My North Indian friends would be very happy. Oh yeah. Give none offense, neither to the Jews, nor to the Gentiles, nor to the church of God. Okay, that's not the text for today at all. But God divides the world into three. The Jews, the Gentiles, and the church of Christ. When God wrote, when this was written, Islam wasn't there. So Islam would kind of fall among the Jews because it's the law. In some way a little manipulated, but still the law. So you have the law, the Gentiles, and the church. The problem is this. The Bible says very clearly, the world, God of this world has blinded the eyes of the Gentiles. So they cannot see at all. As far as those who are under the law, the Jew is concerned, Scripture says they are not blinded, but whenever they read the law, there's a veil over there. So there is the blinded people, the ones who with a veil over their face, and then there are the third set of people who see with open faces. Okay, so three sets of people: the blinded, the veiled, and the open. And that's a good title, right? That's a good title. Okay. Very rarely do you get a title in the beginning of a sermon, okay? The blinded, but don't go there because that may not be the message at all. So we saw a little before earlier in the Nepali service, we see Jesus talking about in Matthew chapter 24, right? That's what we looked. Beginning, Matthew 24. Go to the beginning. And Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came to him to show him the temple. Jesus said to them, okay, go to 3. And as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came unto him privately, saying, tell us, what then shall these things be, and what shall be the sign of thy coming, and of the end of the world? And the first thing Jesus said was, Jesus answered and said unto them, take heed that no one deceives you. The first warning, the most repeated warning in his discourse, the Olivet Discourse, the signs of the last days is beware of deception. Because people can take the sign and use the sign to deceive you. Like simple. Jesus, we have what's called the Lord's Supper. Okay, Lord's Supper. The Lord's Supper is only an emblem of his body and his blood. Now you can take that emblem and go to an extreme and says when you eat it, it becomes the body of Christ, and when you drink, it becomes your blood. So as all as you go through the Eucharist, you are saved. Your life is not so much. This symbol is so important. Then the other side also is there. It doesn't matter if you judge or you not judge. As long as you partake of communion, the emblems, you are safe. Then there is the middle ground which says, judge yourself, body and the blood, then partake of it. You will be strong. Illness doesn't have to come in, and you will be awake. Okay? So symbols, signs also can be misread. That's why before he talks about any sign, he said, be very careful, because people will misuse the sign, and you will get deceived. Always beware of deception. And the actual problem about the deception is this. Only the people in the church can be deceived. The people outside cannot be deceived. They cannot be deceived because they're already deceived. They're blinded. They're not deceived, they're blinded. Okay? The people in the world are blinded. Like the illustration I used in the Nepali service was, if I give a blind man a 100 rupee note, he doesn't know whether it is fake or genuine because he's blind. But if I give a 100 rupee note to a man who can see, I need to be very, very sure the 100 rupee note is as good as the original. Okay, the other one I just have to see the texture, everything is kind of same shape, and he is not able to see. But because of that, he is not very sure. So remember, deception happens within the church. Within the church. So that's why we need to know the Old Testament, because that's a shadow. But we need to know the substance. We cannot leave the shadow out, because before the new covenant came the old covenant. So the old covenant reveals the new covenant. Okay, we understand the new covenant better when we study the old covenant. So that's what we are looking at. And if you come down to verse 7 and 8, okay, for nation shall rise against nations, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famine and pestilences and earthquakes in diverse places. And all these are the beginning of sorrows. I like the other translation, you don't have to go there, which is the beginning of labor pains. Okay, in labor pains, there are two things that are in labor pains. One, there is pain, and then one, there is joy. There is pain because there is labor. There is pain. And there is joy because you know at the end of labor there is something that is going to happen, and you've been waiting for that for a long time. That's the conservative woman who gets pregnant, not the liberals waiting to abort the baby. Okay, for them conception itself is a pain. We are not talking about that. We are talking about the natural order of God, where having a baby is a beautiful thing. Okay, so here, labor pain. So there is pain, but there is joy. So we are not denying the pain. We are all going through, except not few, but all of us are going through pain in the sense is we can't go home. I haven't gone home for so many days, haven't gone home at all, been sitting, and everybody knows there are issues, lot of issues, so there is pain. But for the people in the world, there is only pain and fear. For us, it's pain and joy. That's the important part. Do we have the joy? Because we see the sign. Even if we don't have a joy, we should at least take it as a warning, and God is giving us time to prepare. Okay, it's a preparation. Okay, it's like couple of our sisters in the church. I think it was the last baby Priyanka. I'm not very sure. Like almost a week, 10 days early, her labor pain began, and she went, and then she came back home. Okay, but it was a sign the baby is coming. She got a warning to be prepared, though it didn't happen that day. Okay, so some people are not prepared. Okay, they love the Lord and all, but they're not prepared for this eventuality. So for them, it's a warning. It's a warning. To those who are prepared, it is okay. The pain you go through, but it is also a source of joy. So look at that. And in there, God talks about, for nation shall rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes. And like I said, in this week already there was 2 earthquakes that were reported. Many take place every day, every second it takes place, but which damage 2 were reported. Okay, 2 earthquakes were reported. So in the middle of a pestilence and famine, that is shortage of, famine is basically shortage of resources. So we are having 3 things coming together, and there is a term which is called convergence. Convergence is when a set of series of events that has been prophesied comes together. Be careful. Be careful. Nations rising against nation. Hostility begins against nations. Okay, and famine and pestilence and earthquakes. All these things coming together, not far apart, but coming together. The labor pains coming close. Moreover, he called for a famine upon the land. Okay. Now, we have to look at God as a source. You want to take God out of the picture, it's not going to work. Who called upon his famine? He called upon his famine. And what did he do? He broke the whole staff of bread. He broke it. He's the one. Okay. He called upon his famine. So there is famine. Okay. There is shortage. Supermarkets are all empty. Grocery stores are closed, empty. There's a lot of famine in many countries. Like the poor are sitting on the roads, and by God's mercy, in the middle of this, not only we could feed people with the word, we are also able to feed a lot of people with food. Excited, okay, excited, because this is all which, you see, there are a lot of things we hear, and we know it is faith, but we cannot prove it physically until that event happens. Okay, if you ever Abraham asked, exalted father, father of very nation, what are you talking about, until Isaac is born. Okay, so he goes through a lot of doubt and confusion and funny looks and all these things until that happens. So like a lot of things which God told me, now we are excited because it's happening. Okay, and when I hear Pastor Vijay preach, I'm not boasting or anything. Okay, I'm honest. I'm telling you honestly, he's better than me. Okay, he's better than me. He knows his word much because of the nature of his research, and because he's got this gift of languages and all that stuff. He's actually goes much deeper than me. I've been trying to bring him down a little down so his spread can be more. Okay, and there is no jealousy here. When he does well, it's joy for me. When all my sons do well, it's joy for me. But the fact is that when 8 years, 9 years, when I heard he's the one who will take over from you, I hardly knew him. I hardly heard him preach. Had he preached by then? I'm not sure. I just started, I think. Okay, so now when I see what is happening, it's a source of great joy. Okay, Lord, not only that he's doing so well, the fact that, Lord, I thank you, Lord, all the things which I heard and I stuck by it all these years in spite of everybody against me and hardly anybody believing the stuff I was doing. Because when they say it's very lonely at the top. In so many ways, it was very lonely because I had to take those decisions because it's the nature of our church. We are not a committee-based church or anything like that. We are a church which started with me. God used me to start it. So there are a lot of decisions which I have to personally take, which nobody will understand why I'm taking these decisions. And now I see things falling into place, everything falling into place, no? And it will only show when famine hits. It's only famine. When these things happen, like when you go through trials and testing, that's when you know what is inside comes out. In good times, we know. That's why God says He took them into the wilderness and humbled them, caused them to hunger, to show what was within them. No, till then they were singing and they were all like, they thought we are cat's whiskers. God called us because we are better than everybody else. And God says, no, you are not. You are not better than anybody else. Actually, you're worse than a lot of people. But I had pity on you and I picked you up. Because that's when things inside start coming out. So about famine there. He called for a famine upon the land. And He break the whole staff of bread. So if He called a famine upon the land, what do we do? What is the protection for us? Job chapter 5. Oh, somebody is saying it's not working both on YouTube and Facebook. Okay. Please, somebody call and tell what to do. Not even one person should miss. It's okay. It's Patricia, Sister Patricia. Okay. Job chapter 5. Yeah. Verse 17 onwards. Got it? Behold, happy is the man whom God corrects. Therefore despise not the chastening of the Almighty. Then He makes sore and bindeth up. He woundeth. Oh, we are in KJV. And His hand make whole. He shall deliver thee in 6 troubles. Yea, in 7 there shall no evil touch thee. In famine He shall redeem thee from death. In war from the power of the sword. Did you see that? Did you see that? In famine He shall redeem thee from death. And in war from the power of the sword. You go back to 17. But what is the key? Happy is the man whom God corrects. Are you happy? When God chastens you? Therefore do not despise the chastening of the Lord. Bastards are not sons. No mincing of words there. We try to be very politically correct and make it illegitimate and all that. But to use KJV language, there are a lot of legitimate bastards within the church. They are born again but will not take chastening. They hate the chastening of God, but they are gods. They don't like chastening. And God says, you know what, you got a spirit that is illegitimate. Spirit, you need to get rid of that spirit. Though you have gone through the whole thing of getting born again and baptized and all that, you still haven't got rid of that illegitimate spirit. Not an orphan spirit, that's a different spirit altogether. This is that illegitimate spirit who will not receive chastening. And then God's hand has to be hard on us. Okay, hard on us. On the other hand, happy is the man who receives correction from God. Man, woman, child. Anybody is a happy man if you understand chastening and learn through chastening. And then when these things comes, God will redeem him. God is able to redeem him because he has learned the lesson. So we are looking at famine today because pestilence, famine, they all come together. If you look in the Old Covenant, there are 8 primary famines in the one. It's a famine during the time of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and then Joseph, each generation. Then in Ruth, begins with a famine. Ruth 1:1 begins with a famine. Right? You have another famine in the time of David. 2 Samuel 21:1, you have one there. You have there was a famine in the days of David for 3 years. You have a famine in the days of Elijah. You have a famine in the times of Elisha. 8 famines are there. Primary famines. Okay. So these famines are very, very important. All these famines are lessons, because along with pestilence comes famine. Famine means lack of anything. If you are lacking something in you that you need physically, it's a physical famine. If you lack something which you need spiritually, it's a spiritual famine. Okay, spiritual famine. So when God shuts us in times like that, it's a good time to introspect, check what is happening, and see. So the first famine mentioned in the Bible is found in Genesis chapter 12 and verse 10. Now there was famine in the land, and Abraham went down to Egypt to dwell there, for the famine was severe in the land. Okay, that's the first famine mentioned in the Bible, and it is mentioned with the father of believers, the man who left everything and came into the promised land. And he is in the promised land when the famine happens. Okay? Now if you look in Acts chapter 7 and verses 2 and 3, Acts chapter 7, 2 and 3, we'll go in order. Acts chapter 7, 2 and 3. This is Stephen talking to the Sanhedrin. And if he hadn't spoken this part of Abraham's life, we would have never known. You would have read the whole Genesis account wrong. Brethren and fathers, listen. The God of glory appeared to our father Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia, before he dwelt in Haran, and said to him, get out of your country and from your relatives and come to the land that I will show you. So even before when he was in the Ur of the Chaldeans, God had appeared to him. So everything begins with God. Okay, it begins with God. So God has spoken to him first, the promises. And we all know Genesis chapter 11, verse 32, and then 12:1 onwards. So the days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. He came with his father, came to Haran, and he died. Now the Lord had said to Abraham, get out of your country, from your family, from your father's house, to a land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you, make your name great. You shall be a blessing. You will bless those who bless you. I will curse him who curses you. And in you all families of the earth shall be blessed. So Abraham departed as the Lord had spoken to him. Okay. So one in Ur, one in Haran. Now if you come to 12 and verse 7. Now he's moved into Canaan. God met him there. Okay, he's moved into Canaan, and the Lord appeared to Abraham and said, to your descendants I will give this land. And there he built an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him. So 3 times God has already appeared to him and given him the same promise. And then the famine comes. So do you believe the promises? 3 times in his lifetime. In Ur, in Haran, in Canaan. 3 times he's given him the same promise. This is the land you are to be. And these are the promises connected with the land. And then scripture says there was severe famine. Let's go to 2 Peter chapter 1. 2 Peter chapter 1 and verses 1 to 4. Simon Peter, a bondservant and apostle of Jesus Christ, to those who have obtained like precious faith with us by the righteousness of our God and Savior Jesus Christ. So he's preaching, he's speaking to all who are true believers in Christ. Grace and peace be multiplied to you in the knowledge of God and of our Jesus our Lord. Now look at 3 and 4. His divine power has given to us all things that pertain to life and godliness. So whether you are in famine, lockdown, or free, his divine power, the power of Christ, the power of the Holy Spirit has given to us everything we need for both life and godliness, for this life and for the coming one. Okay? But how do we get it? Through the knowledge of him who called us by glory and virtue. It comes through the knowledge of God, by which have been given to us exceedingly great and precious promises. Incredible promises has been given. And you take those promises, and through these promises, what should happen? How do you know the promise is real? The proof of the pudding is in the eating. These promises, when you partake and when it becomes real, you start partaking of the divine nature of God. That is what I've been trying to hammer in all languages, in all places. Don't go to the law. Don't go to the other side of grace. There is only one life which we dislike. This side it's in our control. That side also flesh is in control. But this side only God is in control. The walk of faith. The walk of faith is dying to self daily. We want to partake of the divine nature and to be in control. Doesn't happen. Jesus came in the flesh, partook of his Father's divine nature and gave control completely to him. That is the walk of faith. Faith comes from hearing. Our issue is not with the word of God. Our issue is with hearing. If somebody were to tell that this is all you need and you don't have to read and hear from the Spirit of God when you read, then there is no issue. No issue. Then you don't have to worry about each day. You don't have to worry about each day. No, you don't know. Yeah? If any man here, say only men sitting here, all the men are told, all you have to do is get married. All you have to do is get married. And you just give a set of instructions to a wife, and that's the only time you need to talk to her. And that is married life. What kind of a married life is that? And Paul compares our life with Jesus Christ with a marriage, and he said it's a mystery. It's a mystery. Okay. So you partake of his divine nature, having escaped the corruption that is in the world through lust. So how do you know you are partaking of the divine nature? Is that as you partake of the divine nature, there is a constant escaping from the world. What is the process through it? Through the promises. The promises, the knowledge of God, the promises, and when you partake of the promises, you are partaking of his life by faith, and you are escaping the corruption of the world. So 3 times God appeared to Abraham and gave him 3 times the same promise. And then the famine came. Now go to Exodus 12:10. Famine came. 12:10 onwards. 3 times he's got. Now he's got these promises, and he's got this choice through these promises, partake of the divine nature of God and escape the corruption that is in Egypt. Egypt is the world then. So there was a famine in the land, and Abraham went down to Egypt. You see, the promises are there. Promises are there. You cannot deny the promise. He heard it in Ur. He heard it in Haran after his father died. He heard it in the promised land, and there was an altar, and God appeared to him too. He gave him the same promise. And all the 3 promises, when he was far away from Canaan, the promise was connected with Canaan. When he was in Haran, close by, the promises was in Canaan. When he was in Canaan, also promise is about Canaan. So it's very clear. Location, GPS is very clear. There's no doubt about GPS. And then to test, the famine comes. The question is, will you stay or will you move? Will you stay or will you move? And we know from the different famines, Abraham moved. Isaac stayed. Jacob was told to move. The question is, what will famine make us do? What will famine make us do? Now look, let's go to Amos 8 and verse 11. Because everybody in some way is caught in the same physical famine, except those who are fasting. Behold, the days are coming, said the Lord, that I will send a famine on the land. Not a famine of bread, not a thirst for water, but of hearing the words of God. This is the dangerous famine, the most dangerous famine. This is the dangerous famine. Abraham was caught in a famine. Isaac was caught in a famine. They were all caught in famines. Now we should turn to Genesis 26 verse 1 and 2. There was a famine in the land beside the first famine that was in the days of Abraham. Isaac went to Abimelech, king of Philistine in Gerar. The Lord appeared to him and said, do not go down to Egypt. So he had no famine of hearing the word. In the midst of the physical famine. It's a physical famine. There's no spiritual famine. You are safe. The outward famine does not matter as long as you do not have an inward famine. The issue is not the outward famine. What you are facing outside is not the problem. That's what the church is not facing. What the church is facing is the inward famine of hearing. That was what I was trying to tell them in Nepali. I hear all these things saying every chain pair from World Council of Churches, from the Pope down to everybody is praying for the coronavirus. My question is, how is your prayer different from the Hindu's prayer, the Muslim's prayer, or Buddhist prayer, or anybody? Everybody is praying the same. What is that? Lord, take God, whichever God it is, God take this virus away, corona away, this pandemic away. But what did Jesus tell us a pandemic or a pestilence is? It's a sign of the kingdom coming, right? It's a sign. And what have all the churches been praying all this 2000 years in formal religion or anything? Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom. And when the kingdom is coming, you're telling it go away. You're contradicting your prayer. This is the problem with religion. When you don't hear. You don't hear. And that is what all news and all the pastors put across. My question is, it's not that you shouldn't pray in a situation like, but what should you pray? What should you pray? Have you heard? Abraham did not hear, so he went the way of Egypt. And a lot of churches haven't heard from God, so they've gone in the way of Egypt. The Buddhist prayer, the Hindu prayer, the Muslim prayer, and the Catholic prayer, and the Protestant prayer, the Pentecostal prayer, all is the same. When they're on here, same. I'm not saying we shouldn't pray. The epidemic should not go, yes. But more than that, Lord have mercy. Eyes should open. Eyes should open to the reality of who you are. Who you are. So Isaac heard. In 2 Samuel chapter 21, there was a famine in the days of David for 3 years, year after year. And David inquired of the Lord, and the Lord answered. So the famine is not the issue. No, the famine is not the issue. First year, okay, second year, third year, this guy's got discernment. He said, okay, hey, hang on. 3 years in a row. There's something wrong over here. This is not natural, this is spiritual. There is a block in the spiritual realm. That's why it's happening in my kingdom. Famine. So he inquired of the Lord, and the Lord answered. Forget about the answer. We'll look at another day. No. But he answered. So there's a famine outside, and you inquire, and you heard. If you go to 1 Kings chapter 17 and verses 1 onwards, 1 to 4. Ruth willing, because nobody inquired. 1 Kings chapter 17. And Elijah the Tishbite of the inhabitants of Gilead said to Ahab, as the Lord God of Israel lives, before whom I stand, there shall not be dew nor rain these years except at my word. He's declaring famine. And then verse 2 comes. The word of the Lord came to him, saying, what about you? Get away from here, turn eastward, hide by the brook Kerith, which flows into Jordan. It will be that you shall drink from the brook, and I have commanded the ravens to feed you there. So there is going to be a famine, but you are taken care of because you have heard. Okay? You have heard. 2 Kings chapter 6 and verse 25, and then 7:1. 6:25. And there was a great famine in Samaria. And indeed they besieged it until a donkey's head was sold for 80 shekels of silver, 1/4 of a cab of dough, droppings for 5 shekels of silver. This is called hoarding and black marketing, happening from that day till today. Nothing has changed. 7:1. And Elisha said, hear the word of the Lord. Thus says the Lord, tomorrow about this time a seah of fine flour shall be sold for a shekel, 2 shares of barley for a shekel at the gate of Samaria. He's heard. So famine is not the problem. The problem is not with famine. The problem is with hearing. The problem is not with pestilence. The problem is with hearing. And that's what God was telling through Amos. I'll send a great famine. Greater than the famine the world is facing now is the famine within the church. of hearing. That's why everybody is praying the same prayer and everybody is panicking. Everybody is panicking. So scripture says, in Genesis, we saw that. Genesis 12 and verse 10. Now there was famine in the land, and Abraham went down to Egypt to dwell there, for the famine was severe in the land. So severe famine doesn't happen overnight. So he never inquired. And we have to excuse him because he's a new believer. New believer. So we have to go to the spiritual side of what God is teaching his children through Abraham, the first prototype of a believer. Not Noah, Enoch and all. They fall under a different category. The first prototype of a believer, justified by faith, father of both Gentiles and Jews, will come to God through Christ. He is the first prototype. So he's a very young believer. He may be 75 plus years old, but a bacche, baby. Okay? Let's go again to 1 Kings chapter 17 and verse 1. How does famine come? Elijah the Tishbite said, as the Lord God of Israel lives before whom I stand, this is what will happen. There shall not be dew or rain these years. No rain, no dew. When this both happens, you are in serious trouble. No rain, no dew, and then you get what? Result of is it? Famine. Now let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 32 and verse 1 and 2. Deuteronomy 32, verse 1 and 2. Give ear, O heavens, and I will speak, and hear, O earth, the words of my mouth. Let my teaching drop as the rain, and my speech distill as the dew, and as the raindrops on the tender herb, and as showers on the grass. So that's why there is famine of the hearing of the word. You missed this. This is where the famine comes. This is where the famine comes. Give ear, O heavens and earth. This is not Moses, this is God. There was 1/3 of fellows who did not hear carefully. And hear, O earth, the words of my mouth. How should my teaching drop? As rain. Let it drop like rain. And my speech distill as dew. Very careful how you handle the word of God. Distill as dew. As the raindrops on the tender herb and the showers on the grass. Okay. So it's giving you, Pastor Vijay will take it and he will now put it under an electron microscope and give it to us. So I'm not getting into that, okay? I will give him the subject, he'll put it under the microscope and give a good analysis of it. But now you see where we are getting at? How does the famine of the hearing of the word comes? It's got something to do with how we take the word when it comes to us. The word is coming to us from heaven. Coming to us from heaven. That's what Peter will commend the Thessalonians. When we came, servants of God, when we came and spoke to us, though we were men, you received the word from us as the word from God. Okay. Therefore, it has the power to work in those who believe. Thessalonian church is commended. Okay. And then he says the Bereans were more noble than because they were distilling it. They were distilling it. You know what distilling is? Distillery. It's after the distillery you get that spirit. To get that spirit, that's why it's called a spirit after the entire process of distill, whatever you call that process. Okay, you have a distillery, distillation, you have a spirit. Meaning the Bereans got the spirit of the word out. They got the spirit of the word out. They got it. And he says, the Thessalonians were noble. Bereans were even more noble. I wish we ever had a letter called the Epistle to the Bereans. Kya baat hai? We didn't get it. No? They didn't need a letter. Probably they would have written a letter to Paul and said, this is what we understood about your message. Is it right? He said, yeah, absolutely. You got it. You got it. Okay. So Abraham did not see, he did not seek, he did not inquire. He just straightaway went into Egypt. He's a young believer. So 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 2 will say this to many young believers who are listening today. As newborn babies desire, now we'll use the word crave, the pure milk of the word that you may grow there. There has to be a desire within you. There is a craving within you. You guys wouldn't know, except the fathers, but I hear from all the new mothers, when their baby doesn't drink milk, it upsets the mother very much. Baby is not drinking. And what do we always tell Abel and Priyankas? This is buffalo milk. We don't believe. This fellow is buffalo milk. We don't believe, Priyanka. This fellow is buffalo milk. Okay? He is craving and drinking pure buffalo milk. Look at this fellow. Okay? So there is a craving. And when the craving is in there, the mother is upset. The mother knows. Okay? So the question is there a craving for the pure milk of the word of God in new believers? Is there? It's a sign. There has to be a craving at every stage. Is there a craving? Why should you crave? Why are all these things important? Because it's not the outward thing. Inwardly we are all building. And Jesus talked about two houses that were built. And the storm hit both the houses. One stood, one fell. The storm is hitting the whole world. Whole world. And many spiritual houses are crashing. I was looking at some of the church websites. Appa, you have to see. I didn't know there were so many ways you could pay. Options. RuPay, PayPal, Paytm, everything to send in your offerings. And they don't even have 2 services a week. Just send your money in. You built such a huge infrastructure which will only run on money. And when the system closes it down, like you're panicking. And your website is only about how you can send in your money. Houses built on sand. Not that you'll crash now, but learn your lesson. The problem is, I always say it is very easy to preach to a new believer. But difficult to preach to a believer who got all the wrong doctrine in to preach the truth. Because first you have to take the junk out. And you will fight every inch of the way when you take it out. It's impossible. Almost impossible. This is the most difficult part. To take that junk out and then give him the truth. You can't stay there as newborn babies. In Hebrews chapter 5 verses 11 to 14. Very familiar, but those who are hearing. Get these principles in, work on it. Otherwise, once this famine is over, you wouldn't realize the next one will be bigger. Of whom we have much to say, hard to explain, since you have become dull of hearing. For though by this time you ought to be teachers, you need someone to teach you again the first principles of the oracles of God. And you come to need milk and not solid food. Now I'm not saying that all of you are not teachers. Everybody may not have the gift of teaching with words, but some of you may be able to write very well. Write very well. Paul may not have been a great speaker, but he was an incredible writer. He could get the ideas of God and put it in words. And that's what Peter was talking about. Peter says, boy, he uses words which I find difficult to understand. Okay? You may have different other gifts through which you actually teach. You may not have the gift of speaking. Okay? But that's not the only way in which people teach. There are different ways, formats in which you teach. Yeah, but you should have been teachers. You need someone to teach you again the first principles of the oracles of God. You mean you've gone back to baby. And you have come to need milk and not solid food. For everyone who partakes only of milk is unskilled in the word of righteousness, for he is a baby. So baby is asked to crave for the milk of the word. But if you are always drinking only the milk of the word, then you are totally unskilled, because this is the word of righteousness. You cannot grow. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. Is the kingdom, the scepter of the kingdom is righteousness. And everything is, the crown is the crown of righteousness. And you cannot handle the word of righteousness. And as long as a child is a child, even though he is the heir of all things, he is no better than a servant. So you don't inherit too, though it was yours. He will be put under guardians. So these are the problems. And it's all got to do with hearing. For everyone who partakes, answer. But solid food belongs to those who are of full age. Spiritual maturity, that is, those who by reason of use have their senses exercised to discern both good and evil. So they understand how to read the word of God. They're getting the meat, the spirit of the word of God. This, Paul will have this, writer of Hebrew. Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 1 to 3, again has problem with the Corinthians. Oh, I, brethren, could not speak to you as spiritual people, but as to carnal, as to babes in Christ. I fed you with milk and not with solid food, for until now you were not able to receive it, and even now you are still not able. How do you know? How do you know you're a baby? Everybody reads the same word. Everybody hears the same word. But how do you know? Answer, for you are still carnal. For where there are envy, strife, divisions among you, that means you are a baby. You are a baby. You're just a child throwing tantrums. Are we getting it? This is the problem. If you are not spiritual, then you become carnal. There's no in between called secular. The kingdom of God. You're either spiritual or carnal. And all your choices in every situation becomes carnal. Abraham took off. Abraham took off. He looked at the ground and he took off. If you look at Hosea, that's how you pronounce in English, Hosea, Hosea in Telugu. Oh, so chapter 10 and verse 12. Sow for yourself righteousness, reap in mercy. Break up your fallow ground, for it is time to seek the Lord till he comes and rains righteousness on you. Just because there is no rain, that should not mean you should not break your fallow ground. Break your fallow ground. Break your fallow ground. Sow yourself in righteousness. You will reap in mercy, and the Lord will come and rain righteousness over you. Okay, break your fallow. That's what Abraham did not do, and that's what his son did, because he heard. He broke the fallow ground, and he reaped 100-fold that year, because he broke the fallow ground in the midst of famine. So it's not, the problem is not with this famine. The problem is not with the ground. The problem is with hearing. Break the fallow ground. Sow what? For yourself righteousness. What will you reap? Mercy. And then he will come and rain. Okay. Now listen to Peter again in 1 Peter chapter 2. We heard about in verse 2, crave. But let's read verse 1. Therefore lay aside all malice, all deceit, hypocrisy, envy, and all evil speaking as newborn babies. So that is the breaking of the fallow ground. You get rid of a lot of stuff and drink the milk of God. If you try to drink the milk of God without breaking the fallow ground, you're wasting the seed. If you throw the seed on the ground, without breaking the fallow land, it's a waste. So the writer of Hebrews and Paul, the Holy Spirit through all of them is sounding a warning. And I believe God is sounding a warning to the whole church by shutting down and practically the entire world. Have you built so far? Will it last? At least now will you take a break and start plowing the fallow ground. Fallow ground is a ground that has not been plowed for quite some time. Like I said, it's a waste to sow good seed on fallow ground. It must be broken up. Because if it doesn't grow, we will not get a harvest. Fallow ground was once probably produced a good harvest. But it's like the book of Judges. Israel, once upon a time, what happened? God said, you went there. Ground has become. Then one judge comes. They defeat the enemies. And then the judge dies. And again the ground becomes fallow. Philistines take over. And they have to cry out. Again another judge comes. The problem with fallow ground is that it's not that the fallow ground does not produce anything. It produces thorns and thistles. Have you noticed? They grow in fallow ground. In Matthew 13:22 tells, what does fallow ground produce? Thorns and thistles. He who received seed among the thorns is he who hears the word, and the cares of this world and the deceitfulness of riches choke the word, and it becomes unfruitful. Two things are mentioned there. What is that? It's a incredible combination. Cares or worries of the world. Now what happens as this famine is going on, or anything that is going on? You're a believer, you hear the word, and you got so many problems in your life, and all the time, even in your prayer or in your desire, is that if I had money, I could have handled this. That's the deceitfulness of wealth. The cares, okay? The cares, when churches, taxes have to be paid, all this has to be paid, all this has to be paid, they put all the gadgets on the web page, how to send your money. The other cares. And the deceitfulness of wealth. What is the deceitfulness of wealth? The wealth offers to substitute God for you and faith for you. And the crooks will come and says you can use faith to get money. Not God. Okay? That's why I was talking about Elijah. Lack of rain causes drought. And the result of drought is famine. But there is drought and there is famine. Famine is lack. But Elijah never is affected by the famine because he hears, whether he says Kerith or Zarephath. Famine be under drought, but you're still escaping the famine because you heard. Okay? Ravens bring him food. Brook, there is water flowing. And when it finishes, God says, go over there. And when he heard it doesn't sound at all logical or anything. But because he obeys, the famine goes over him. The pestilence goes over him. The judgment goes over him because he heard. He heard. This is why it is so important where scripture says faith comes from hearing. Fallow ground produces thorns and thistles. Not only that, Hebrews 12, verse 14 and 15. Pursue peace with all men and holiness without which no one will. Looking carefully lest anyone fall short of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness. What does it bring forth? Fallow ground produces bitterness. Why is Naomi so bitter and Ruth is not? Though both came out of the same situation. One is fallow ground, the other broke the fallow ground. You can see from their words. Both are in the same situation. Both are widows. Both have no husbands and no children. Both widows. Terrible situation to be taught at a time like that. A widow. One is bitter. One is not. Bitter men and women. What causes that root of bitterness? It's a fallow ground. You never broke it. Worries of life. Deceitful of wealth. You have so many problems. Yet you are not breaking the fallow ground for the seed of word to go in, you're still hoping if only you had money. If only you had money. If only I had money, I could have solved my problems. So even when you turn to God, you're not turning to God, you're turning to the God of money. You see God as the God of money and saying, can you send me some money? So can I handle my problems? God says, no, I will handle your problems. Will you listen to me? No. Why was Joseph never bitter? He was fruitful wherever he was. No thorns, no thistles. So God is teaching us through Abraham. Let's go back to Genesis chapter 12. When famine comes, how is our ground? This is a spiritual truth we are looking through the life of the first recognized official believer. Now there was famine in the land and Abraham went down to Egypt. He was not willing to break the ground, though he had 3 times heard the same promise. And it came to pass. It came to pass. As he was close to entering Egypt. This is the promised land. All fallow ground. He doesn't want to dig or try anything. He hasn't even gone and inquired the Lord. And that is Egypt. And as he is getting closer to Egypt, Egypt is getting closer into him. That's what the Bible says. It came to pass, when he was close to entering Egypt, he said to his wife. Now what is he talking? He's talking the language of Egypt. He's not talking the language of Canaan. He's talking the language of Canaan. Sorry, Egypt. Okay. That's the problem with fallow ground. When you haven't dug the fallow ground, we start moving closer and closer to the world and we start speaking the language of the world. How to solve problems. He said, indeed I know that you are a woman of beautiful countenance. Therefore it will happen when the Egyptians see you that they will say, this is his wife. They will kill me, but they will let you live. Please say you are my sister, that it may be well with me for your sake, that I may live because of you. So it was. Did you see how everything changed? Everything changed. So it was when Abraham came into Egypt, the Egyptians saw the woman and she was very beautiful. Compromise begins. And it begins with the thought life. It begins here. You start conforming to the pattern of the world. And the world always looks at the church and finds the church beautiful. And the world always wants to seduce the church. That is why always the first people who go worldly anywhere are the Christians. And not the others. Because the enemy is out to seduce Sarah. Because Sarah is beautiful. Church is beautiful. Devil is after the men and the women in the church. Verse 15. The princess of Pharaoh also saw her, commended her to the Pharaoh. The woman was taken to Pharaoh's house. And verse 16. He treated Abraham well for her sake. Bahut mila. So, you have traded your integrity for safety and prosperity. That's why you have all kinds of churches around the world, especially where persecution is. One is called overground, the other is underground. The overground has traded their integrity for peace and prosperity. The others refuse. Where did it start with? With Abraham. With Abraham. So the question is, what does Egypt do to us? What has famine done to us? Have we sold? That's a Laodicean church. This is a Laodicean church. I'm rich. I have need for nothing. God says you're neither hot nor cold. You have no clue your stage. You're very close to being spat out. You're blind. You compromise completely. After that, he treated, okay, yeah, go further down. The Lord plagued Pharaoh and his house. with great plagues because of Sarai, Abraham's wife. Okay. Okay, now God is involved in it to protect Sarah, not Abraham. We don't even know what this man did. Did he pray? Did he intercede? Did he fast? And all he's looking at all his camels and cattle and everything. Okay. Like the old illustration which I keep on saying, over time it looks repetitive, but it's the truth. You see Abraham in his massive tent with all his servants and slaves and everything, and you look at it and say, ask Abraham, whose are all this? He says, mine. And whose are all this? All this cattle? Yes, all this. Boy, you're a rich man. Yes. Are you happy? No. Why? Because my wife is in somebody's house. Have you slept well? No. At what price did you buy your peace? At what price did you get your prosperity? Didn't God say He would bless you? The devil also can bless you, but he blesses you at the cost of your integrity. God blesses you and never makes you lose your integrity. Daniel also was blessed. Joseph also was blessed. But they didn't lose what was important in the kingdom of God. So we are not after blessings. We are after God. So God plagued Pharaoh to get Abraham out of Egypt. And Israel actually out of Egypt. It's connected with Sarah. It is connected with Sarah. We saw today in the evening session in Isaiah, right? 51 and 2, right? You need to realize that's part. Listen to me, you who follow righteousness. If you're following righteousness, listen to me. You who seek the Lord, look to the rock from which you were hewn, and to the hole of the pit from which you were dug. Look to Abraham your father and to Sarah who bore you. That's why God plagued Pharaoh's household, because he had already decided it is Abraham. Through Sarah, Israel will come. And through Israel, Christ will come. He plagued. If you go to Exodus chapter 2 and verse 23. Now it happened in the process of that time, the king of Egypt died, and then the children of Israel groaned because of the bondage, and they cried out, and their cry came up to God because of the bondage. Why did they cry? Because of the bondage. They were only upset with the bondage. There were two things of Egypt. One was the pressure, the other was the pleasure. They did not like the pressure, but they liked the pleasure. Two things in this world. One is the pressure. The other is the pleasure. The problem is, most of us are like them. We cry out to God because of the pressure. We do not cry out to God to rescue us from the pleasure. Okay? Under pressure, Moses gave in. Now neither the pressure is gone, nor can he enjoy the pleasure of all this prosperity. That is why the devil deceives. If you go to Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 25. Choosing, this is Moses, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasure. See, he's the only one who made a choice. He said, I will take more pressure and say no to pleasure. I'll take more pressure. When you say no to the world, the pleasures of the world, you're going to get more pressure. And you say you're not going to compromise. Daniel was pursued all the way till his whole life. They tried everything and say, okay, at least we can get him in his prayer life. We can't get him anywhere. Everybody complains about the pressure of work. Is anybody complaining about the pleasure of the world? Honestly. No? Think, we are not talking about the world. We are only talking to believers. All these days, did anybody believe, Lord, there's too many malls in Hyderabad? Did we complain? Too many malls, Lord, please. Too many theaters. How come nobody complained those things? We complain about too many work hours, too much distance we have to travel. The word is too long. We never complained the malls were too many. Too many pubs. We all even brought Jesus into it, God into the picture with the pubs. Thank God it is Friday. Brought God there. See, you heard about the Welsh revival. When the Welsh revival took place, it was like today. Every pub, every theater, everything shut down. Government didn't have to do anything. There were no people going. Everybody had been touched by the Holy Spirit. Nobody had to say anything. The Holy Spirit did the work. Everything shut down because there were no more customers left. Everybody got saved. Everybody got filled with the Holy Spirit. It was a spiritual lockdown. This is a government lockdown. This is what we are talking about. This is a government lockdown. But the question to believers is, do you need the government to lock you down? Turn with me in the book of Acts, chapter 16. Verses 25, very familiar portion. Two people, Paul and Silas, have done an incredible, 16, 25 to 28. Okay, did a deliverance, they got beaten, stripped, thrown into jail, hands tied probably, legs in the stock. And verse 25 says, what were these two guys doing? They were singing. Yeah, shall we go to 25? At midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the prisoners were listening to them. Okay, there's a midnight hour. This is not only locked down, locked in and chained in. Locked down, chained in. What are they doing? They are praying and they are singing hymns to God. And the prisoners were listening to them. Okay, we know this. Suddenly there was a great earthquake so that the foundations of the prison were shaken. And immediately, listen, read carefully. Immediately all the doors were opened and everyone's chains were loose. We have preached all about how others, when you really worship, other people get liberated in your offices and all. Leave that all alone. All the doors were opened. Prison doors. Everybody's chains were loosed. And the keeper of the prison, awaking from sleep, seeing the prison doors open, supposing the prisoners had fled, drew his sword and was about to kill himself. And Paul called with a loud voice, saying, do yourself no harm, for we are all here. What did he say? We? Okay, we can understand Paul and Silas. But all are there. All the doors are open. All the doors are open. Did you see? All the doors are open. All the chains are, but nobody left. They didn't need a lockdown to gather around Paul and Silas. The doors are open. They're free to go. Oh boy, if the jail doors are open, chains are, you know how the prisoners flee? Everything is open. Nobody is going. They probably, all of them are around Paul and Silas. They had heard him singing. Now they said, can we hear you preaching? This is the question God is asking. God's children do not need carnal lockdowns because they are always locked down to the world. You don't need it. A lockdown like this should not make us meetings a week increased. My question is this, don't worry about the lockdown. Let us say today is what? 26. Suddenly WHO declares the pandemic is under control. And Prime Minister Modi says 30th lockdown is released. 1st of April. Will your lives change drastically again? Did you learn the lesson of the lockdown? What will happen? What will happen? The chains are off. The The doors are open. What will you do? Back to the pub? Back to the mall? Back to the theater? Back to life as before? Then you didn't understand what God was trying to teach you. The chains are off. The doors are open. Nobody left. Nobody left. It's not that Paul and Silas, so many are saying both are not working. There's so many on this thing. Abel is saying it's working here in Jamshedpur. Live stream off time. Refresh please. Okay, both are not working. Ayyo. Facebook is working. Some of our dear older generation are not such tech savvy. Okay, I'll give you a 2-minute break. Elsa, nothing is working. Okay. FB is working.
There's a problem with YouTube, Pastor.
Okay.
I think a lot of people are.
No, that can't be. Ours is hardly anything. Does it come? Facebook is working? Hmm? Please somebody post to Ma also, okay? Because she's just sent her a text with the Facebook link saying Facebook is working. Facebook didn't break at all, right? Yes. It broke? No. Okay. YouTube is working in net going.